Hey there. Welcome back to Story Time. Whether you're here live or watching later, I appreciate you being here and taking a look. We've got some folks joining us live, and I'm going to jump right into this today. I am wrapping up the Gospels today. So that's why I decided to call it Jesus' Hot Take on Marriage, because there's one final story to read, one final story time read from the Gospels, and then I want to do a quick review of what Jesus is attributed with saying in relation to marriage, because, well, um, it's surprising, right? For people for whom Jesus is really important, right? I realize it's not everybody watching this video, but I do know that for some people, he's still really important. And and even more so perhaps for people, people who are watching this have people in their lives for whom Jesus is really important. And I think that being aware and being honest about the fact that the words attributed to Jesus in relation to marriage are basically not he's not a family values guy. He's anti-procreation, and he doesn't endorse being, sticking it out in a marriage. Like, it's none of the things that we would consider to be Jesus giving a good strong endorsement for marriage. And so I think that was one of the most startling things for me to really sit with as I wrote this upcoming book, Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say, was really sitting with, okay, if someone is a follower of Jesus or of Christ, whichever way you refer to him, then these words, this stance or this collection of stances ought to be really important to you. And it doesn't seem to be when people want to talk about the Bible and marriage. People genuinely seem to disregard the full context of the words attributed to Jesus on this subject. And it is so, like, that's stunning to me, right? Whether you consider yourself a follower or a Christian, or you just know a bunch of people who are, I think this is a really important nugget for the larger conversation, right? I'm I'm a biblical scholar. I care about what people are saying and doing with the Bible on the conversation or topic of marriage. And I've been working on that for over a decade. Been, I've been invited to speak at different denominational conferences on this topic. I have been writing. I was an ed. I had a blog, or not really a blog, but I got to submit editorials every now and then back with Huffington Post back before Ariana left. I've created a video series. I'm doing this particular series of conversations or just story time about it. I've put a lot of time and energy into trying to help people understand what to do with the Bible on this conversation. And so today's summary takeaway, I think, ought to be rather important to people who find Jesus to be important. You know what I mean? So, all right. I'm just checking in on the comments, and I love the way the people are supporting each other right now. It's kind of sweet. It's really lovely. Okay. So I'm going to read from the one story that I know of that it remains, which is the story in John chapter 4 of Jesus interacting with a woman at the well. And then we're going to do a quick summary of everything attributed to Jesus. So one thing for you to know is that when you have a male associated with the Jewish tradition, encountering a woman at a well, then for most Jews, this is going to bring up kind of the Hebrew Bible context and passages that also do this, right? So Isaac, who was Abraham's son, a slave goes to find Isaac, a woman, and that first encounter takes place at a well. That's where the slave says a prayer before he goes over to the well and basically says, "Okay, God, uh, this is how things are going to go for me to know that she's the right one. I'm going to do this and she's going to do that." And that's exactly how it takes place. And so there's this moment at the well. It's a, you know, it's a gathering place perhaps, but it's also ends up becoming something of a trope, or, kind of one of those stories that, oh, this is a betrothal scene kind of a thing. Okay. Then when Jacob, the next generation later, right, when Jacob goes to find himself a woman, he does the same thing. In fact, goes to a well and has this encounter with men in the community, and then he sees Rachel and finds her beautiful and lays one on her, and follows her home and all that stuff. So betrothal scene, the start of a betrothal scene, is what happens when men and women interact at wells. it's just two stories, but it's enough that when you start this story in chapter 4, at least if you're familiar with the Hebrew Bible, you're going to have this, oh wait, is Jesus about to pair up? I mean, I think it's a reasonable question to be asking when you hear the story. Now, it's being used for a primarily Greek audience, so maybe it doesn't surprise anyone that he doesn't actually end up marrying her. And it's being used for different ends in this case. So John chapter 4. Wow, it's only 7 minutes in and I'm already starting story time. Who knew I could do it that fast, huh? I didn't, apparently. Okay, so let's do a little story time. John chapter 4. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard, quote, "Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John," end quote, although it was not Jesus himself, but his disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee. So start heading north, back home. Because remember, in John's gospel, we go through 3 cycles of Passover. So instead of just 1 year, as in the synoptics. Okay. But he had to go through Samaria. Little side note on Samaria. Does anybody know the story about Samaria and why it's meant to be an oxymoron to say good Samaritan in the gospel context? The ancestry of the people of Samaria are Northern Kingdom Israelites and Assyrian soldiers who were left to occupy the territory. So you have those already sinful or not quite keeping things, not quite in line with things, Northern Kingdom, people, tribes. They don't worship in Jerusalem. So obviously there's something wrong with them. But then they also end up intermarrying with other people who aren't of the Israelite tribes. So there's a negative association with Samaria and Samaritans in general. So that that element of their story is at least 800 years old by the time we get to Jesus. So it's an interesting thing because, or 750 years old, whatever. It's like we have this long-term ethnic, racially based prejudice that in that story, the Good Samaritan, he kind of turns on its head. So a listener at this point knows, kind of what's going to happen in Samaria kind of thing when you get to that point in the story. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman, came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." It's so bad. I have a hard time not just thinking, "Yo, bitch, make me a sandwich." That's what I think of when I hear this. I'm sorry. It's terrible. "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew," even though she's kind of like partially Jewish, by heritage, "how is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Parenthetically, Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans. Well, they do actually, if you go back far enough in the ancestry. But yeah, by the time of the 1st century, it's way too far removed, right? Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." I have a really hard time reading John's gospel because Jesus talks about himself in third person, like we just saw right here. Jesus is also really, really rude, in my opinion. I have a hard time reading this without there being an edge of criticism or judgment in his voice. I've tried, and I just don't, it doesn't make sense to me, except for to read it as if he's being kind of rude and judgmental all the time. If you knew the gift of God and who it is that's saying to you this, I mean, he's just rude all the time, and not just to women, you know? Anyway, you would have asked him, talking about himself, and I, would have given you living water. The woman said to him, Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where did you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well and with his sons and his flocks drank from it? It's really interesting, too, that she claims heritage to Jacob, right? As she should and gets to, right? But even the storyteller says that Jews don't share things in common with Samaritans. So who's right? Because either they do have things in common, their shared ancestry, or they don't. Just had to point that out. Okay. Where are you going to get this water, basically? Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water. Goodness gracious, wouldn't that be great? Huge time saver, right? You say that we'll never be thirsty, right? That'd be awesome. Jesus said to her, you silly woman, go call your man and come back. The woman answered to him, I have no man. In my English, it says husband both times. Jesus said to her, you were right in saying, I have no man, husband in English, for you've had 5 men, husband in English, and the one you now have is not your man, husband in English. What you have said is true. Isn't that nice to have a man telling you that what you've said is true? I'm so sorry. I really don't like Jesus and John. It's really, really hard for me to do this without just pointing out how ridiculous he sounds. The woman said to him, Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem. Posing a point or a question without actually asking it. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. Location is not going to matter. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. It's so offensive to me. I just have to point it out, right? You worship what you do not know. Like, how dare you? How dare you? That is it's just so rude and judgmental. And I have to do this little sidebar because one of the reasons it bugs me so much is that I remember being quite fond of the Jesus in John. The Jesus in John's gospel is full of certainty and truth and knowledge and the right ideas versus the wrong, and is constantly reiterating what is correct or right or true, and is judging people all over the place. And conservative evangelicals, like I used to be, tend to be really fond of Jesus and John. In fact, not just evangelicals. Most Christians get a lot of ideas about who Jesus is from John's gospel. So I just needed to point this out because it really bugs me the way he says this to her. Okay, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither here on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers, notice the dichotomy here. The true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. God is spirit is a really interesting claim, and I think there are people who are doing what you might refer to as process theology today, trying to redefine God. I find that a really intriguing idea, to redefine God, and instead of based on what we see in the Bible, but maybe based on more like what our current scientific ideas would back up. Like some sort of spark of life energy is God. But anyway, so this idea to have Jesus calling God spirit is really kind of interesting. Problem is he still ends up calling God male, which doesn't hold up, right? You still need, if that's the case, then you need God to be either androgynous or hermaphroditic. You know what I mean? But anyway, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us. Jesus said to her, I am he, the one who is speaking to you. Just then his disciples came. They were astonished that he was speaking with a woman, but no one said, what do you want? Or why are you speaking with her? Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, come and see a man who told me everything I've ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he? They left the city and were on their way to him. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, Rabbi, teacher, eat something. And there's this whole little thing that goes on from there. So I always wanted to, so the reason I'm reading this story is because of this brief part of their exchange that has to do with this woman having had 5 husbands, according to the language I'm seeing here. I don't like the language of husband and wife in reference to biblical texts because there aren't different words being used there in the Greek or the Hebrew the way we do in our English. So I prefer to say man and woman. But here's the thing. I don't know. I think it's a 10-second delay between what I'm saying here and what I'm getting to see in the chat, just FYI. And so part of me is just curious. I like polling. I wish we were interacting live, but I'm curious how others have heard this story. This woman who allegedly has had 5 husbands, and now the man she's living with isn't even her husband. I'm curious what other people have heard done with this story. I did get to use this story briefly in the book Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say? Very briefly. But it's interesting because I grew up hearing, and also in high school and Bible studies and whatever, I grew up hearing her being referenced, and there was always kind of an edge of judgment on her because she'd had 5 husbands. I mean, it is an interesting point, right? How many people today do you know who've been married 5 times? No, I don't mean this at all in a judgmental way at all, but I raise the question because truly, how many people do you know who've been married that many times? And one of the questions that comes up usually for people when you say they've been married 2 or 3 times is like some sort of judgment of their character because they couldn't make it work. I don't think of it that way, but people start to have some sort of edge, like they're not very grounded, they're not very respectful, or they're manipulative. So they get someone into a marriage, and then once you're in it, it's just awful. And so they end up like doing this to 2 or 3 people. And what I had lingering in my mind, at least, was some sort of judgment on her because she'd had sex with 5 different men. Now, I don't assume that everybody heard it that way or took that kind of a message away from it if you heard it growing up. But I'm pretty sure that some people did, because I can't believe I'd be the only person who heard it that way growing up, right? There's a judgment on her for having been married 5 times. And I mean, I've heard some serious slander thrown at this woman over the years. So if we were having a live class right now, I would be asking you all to share stories. Like what have you heard? What were you told about this woman? Let's see, somebody threw something in there. Basically, I heard that she was a slut. They didn't use that word, but they meant it. Thank you, considering anew. Yeah, thank you. You have a friend who's working on number 6. All right, right? I mean, there's lots of things. People grow and change, or there are lots of reasons that people get married, right? Um, I worry about the emotional impact that has on people, right? More than some form of judgment of you, because what if you've been widowed 4 times, And that's one of the things about this particular story is some scholars have suggested, well, what if she's simply a victim of the levirate marriage scenario and all of the men just kept dying on her? I mean, what if she was? That's kind of an interesting point, don't you think? Yeah, and she was forced to be married to 5 brothers. Ugh, ah. It's not a big surprise, right? That the church, which is unfortunately founded on patriarchal worldview, ideas, doctrine, and leadership, right? Judges a woman, just judges women for their sexuality or employing their sexuality in ways that are beyond the control of men in a sense, right? If she's married 5 times, they're still under men's control, but like there's something about that, right? Why do pastors feel the need to bash her over the head in a sense? Isn't and why and it took having another scholar point this out for me to like stop and see the point and be like, oh my gosh, she's a victim. She's not like even if they were all divorcing her because she kept burning dinner or something, I don't know. It's still beyond her reach. Women in the first century were not able to initiate divorce. It's not like it was her choice to get divorced. Maybe she had a squeaky voice. I don't know. Maybe her voice got annoying over time and people couldn't handle it. I don't know. Or maybe there were just a bunch of jerks who, like I just don't want to make it about her. I just don't because it's not fair. But anyway, she's been married 5 times and she's now living with a man she's not married to. And so, yeah, what considering anew said, right? She is the one being looked at and judged when it's this patriarchal system that has subjected her to this or has meant that she had to be married in order to survive, which means, little, for women in general, right? How little control you have over your life if you have to be dependent upon a man to survive. So there's that. It is interesting though that he doesn't judge her for it. And that again for me becomes another really interesting layer of the whole scenario because in context Jesus doesn't judge her, but I've heard a lot of pastors judge her. And they're not taking Jesus' lead on this one. You know how I got really worked up over the woman supposedly caught in adultery and Jesus doesn't apologize to her. I don't feel like he goes anywhere near far enough in his apology to, when he says, I'm not judging you either. Leave, go on your way and don't sin anymore. Like, I don't feel like that's enough, right? But here, Jesus sets a pretty decent example. He's not judging her. No judgment. I'm not seeing judgment. And he's judging her for other things. Like he does with lots of Jewish people he interacts with, Jewish leaders he interacts with. He tells them they're stupid all the time. But he's not judging her for having 5 husbands. Isn't that interesting? Very fascinating to me. Okay. That's all there is to say on the topic of marriage, sex, and physical abuse related to intimate body parts. So let's do a quick review then. Let's do the review. And, we do have this. So here's, I wonder if the people live are able to say what I've said, like what the highlights are in terms of what Jesus is attributed with saying about marriage. I can't help but be a teacher and want to be in a classroom with people. So, what are the highlights? The highlights are what is put in Jesus's mouth in terms of what's attributed to him in the Gospels. He says you can leave your family to follow him. That's anti-family values, if you ask me, right? Pump them out or make your woman pump them out and then leave them behind to go follow Jesus. Yeah, not so great. Not so great. Let's see. We have the story where he's approached, and I'm going to read it again because I think I covered it briefly um, earlier, and I'm going to read the Lucan version. I think I read the Matthean version before. Some Sadducees. So this is in Luke chapter 20. Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a woman, English says wife, but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her. And so, in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose woman, English says wife, will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Okay, first of all, he just threw everybody who's married under the bus. Did you see that? Y'all aren't worthy of the resurrection or of a place in the next life. Did you notice that? I mean, words attributed to Jesus in the Gospels could not be more anti-marriage. Are you all tracking? Those who belong to this age marry and are given a marriage, but hey, y'all are too, weak or something to be worthy of whatever. But those who considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Totally anti-marriage here, right? Also, he doesn't say, and this is, I know I mentioned this earlier in a previous story time, he doesn't say, by the way, that whole levirate marriage thing is just awful for women, or it's just a terrible way to treat women, or maybe we should do away with that practice, or something. No, he doesn't make any sort of commentary on a practice that these men seem to think is still alive and well. Or they wouldn't be using it as an example of a story to try to trip Jesus up on something, right? So practicing levirate marriage, at least on the books, still in the first century. Jesus isn't against it. So Jesus seems in favor of, by not commenting, so I have to acknowledge that. He's not addressing it, but that means you're leaving it as is, right? It's like what we say today, and saying nothing in the face of injustice is contributing to the injustice, right? So he's, by not addressing it, is complicit with endorsing levirate marriage, says you're only those who are really worthy of the kingdom are not going to get married. Marriage is really about having children and so we know where the inheritance goes. You can leave your family behind if you feel like it to follow me. His comments on divorce and adultery all focus on the idea of a woman's body as property. The only reason in the Gospels at all that divorce is a problem is focused on the sex act. The only reason that divorce is a problem is because of the sex act and how their ancient views of what sex is and how sex allows a man to claim a woman as his property. That's the premise that Jesus is upholding in multiple places in the Gospels. So three times in Matthew, once in Luke, once in Mark. When Jesus talks about marrying and divorcing and remarrying and connects that with adultery. He's saying that that sex binds you to someone in a way that is absolutely unseverable. And the issue here is that sex claims someone as property, binds two people together in a way that is inseparable. I mean, the intensity and control of bodies going on in this language, it's just unbearable. Really, it's awful to me. It's just awful. I feel like it ought to be awful to everyone. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that level of of control. I'm trying to think of a better word here. So the things that putting that level of ownership and entitlement to someone else's body and whatever into this coming together of two bodies. I mean, that level, seeing it at that level is just way too much. It can't, that encounter really can't sustain that level of that heaviness, that level of meaning. And I mean, it's just gross. It just makes me, ugh. So that's what we have. That's what we have attributed to Jesus in the Gospels. Those are the comments he makes. You're not worthy of the resurrection if you marry. Oh, right. And don't forget, I forgot. So we have 6 things. You're not worthy of resurrection if you marry. I really don't have a problem with levirate marriage. So a woman being forced to have sex with potentially several brothers. And by the way, they're not even actually marrying the second, third, fourth, and so on. They're just doing what's expected of a brother-in-law. So that's a weird relationship to begin with. It's not even actually marriage at that point. You can leave your family to follow me. Sex is a way that men claim women's bodies, and therefore that is why divorce is a problem, because sex makes you bound like in a way that is not severable, makes you bound to one another. You own or belong to another person just because you have sex. Good God, it's awful. And then Jesus also says to men, those who can handle it should chop their balls off. So when people say that God ordained procreation for marriage, they just haven't listened to what Jesus has said. They just haven't, right? I'm not denying that Genesis 1 talks about being fruitful and multiplying, but Genesis 1 also has God telling the birds of the air and the fish of the sea to be fruitful and multiply. I don't think that just the command alone to be fruitful and multiply is about marriage. I don't think that. I can't think that given the context. I don't think that's what Genesis 1 is trying to talk about. I think we're really reaching or requiring these texts to say and do way more than I think they were intended to say or do. There's already enough going on in our lives around relationships. We don't need to add more intensity to them, seems to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just think we should be grateful that some people having sex are not going to get pregnant. I just think that's in this world of overpopulation, and we're not feeding everyone who is alive. It seems to me we should be grateful that there are lots of people having sex who are not going to be bringing children into the world, whether that is because they choose to take prophylactic or they're not regularly putting a penis in a vagina. I just think we should be grateful instead of really, really frightened, Anyway, back to the point. Jesus' hot take on marriage, right? You can leave your partner to follow Jesus. Those worthy of the kingdom of heaven actually aren't going to marry or be given in marriage. He's okay with levirate marriage, right? Sex is what defines a marriage. Women belong to men because men have had sex with them. And men, if you can handle it, chop your balls off, which makes procreation really difficult. Jesus is so anti-marriage. I'm not sure you could be more anti-marriage. than Jesus is depicted being. And yet, so many of his followers seem to think that he is pro-family. Isn't that interesting, really? Isn't that interesting? So that's Jesus' hot take. I'm just looking through the chat just to see if there's not something I've missed. I really like Jesus' advice encouraging self-neutering. That was excellent advice. Exactly. Family members of mine who married after widowhood were respected. Family members who remarried after divorce were disrespected. Okay, hope you don't mind considering anew. I'm putting this up here because considering anew could use some love and support today in general, or this week in general, but also I find this fascinating, right? There's been an interesting chatter going on, but who remarried after widowhood you're respected, you're fine because you haven't done anything wrong. But those who remarried after divorce, right? It's such a great example. Thank you so much, considering anew, right? It just brings into focus what it was I was trying to highlight here, right? In terms of this woman in John 4, right? Who's, depicted a certain way or characterized a certain way because she's had sex with 5 men. Not feeling bad for her for being a victim of patriarchal society, right? Judging her for having sex with 5 men. Yeah. The judgment around divorce. Here's the thing. I'm not interested. I'm interested in supporting couples. I'm interested in supporting healthy long-term supporting, people in their endeavors to be together long-term. I'm interested in supporting relationships. I get that it's not always easy. I get all the, I'm interested in being honest about the whole messy thing about long-term relationships. So it's not like I'm not anti-marriage, right? I've performed 3 in my lifetime. But I also, the way these things, the way the judgment on something such as divorce has come out of, it's not just from biblical texts, of course, but we do live in a fairly Christian informed or influenced Western culture, right? And so the ideas around divorce and the judgment, the heavy, heavy, heavy judgment in our culture around divorcing and remarrying. Like, why is it that people have a problem with someone else's relationship choices, right? Why is that anyone's business, first of all? But really, just that simple comparison of someone who remarries after being widowed is, oh, poor thing, and good for her. We're glad she's happy. Whereas someone who remarries after divorce is just judged as what, right? No one said that first marriage for the widow was great. No one knows why that first guy died. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, it just so many times too, when a divorce happens, it's because one or both partners, kind of grew up in the marriage, got married too early, and both of you were still growing, and you realize you're too different or whatever, and you just needed to get away from that person for lots of reasons. Abuse, or we're just too different, we've grown in different directions, all kinds of things, right? So this whole idea of judging people for divorce, I'd love to undo that. I'd love to take that judgment away. And this, I know this is like 40 minutes in, so I don't know. I just thought maybe I should say this at the beginning also. Maybe I'll do that next time. But I want to say, it occurred to me as I reflect on some of the things I say in these live moments that, I'm not interested in saying that I think everybody should have a lot of sexual partners or something like that. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say here when I talk about sex. And I try to encourage people to stop judging others who have multiple sexual partners. I'm trying to talk about us having just honest and reasonable conversations about sex instead of being afraid of talking about it, instead of giving people really unhealthy perspectives on it, and not giving people space to talk about it, to be honest and have healthy conversations and healthy perspectives on themselves and what it is and all of that, right? I'm not, I'm not trying to say something specific about multiple sexual partners except a lack of judgment around it all so that people can have honest conversations, can not feel judged about sexual interactions, right? And not feel judged for whatever their own proclivities are around that. And we do have a range of desires and interests. And I think all of that is much more appropriate. So, okay, I'm not sure what's going on in my house right now. Okay, somebody's visiting apparently. So, um, I needed to say that. I will probably say that again at another point, maybe earlier on next time. So, oh my gosh, I just saw that there's somebody in here called Hunter Biden's laptops. Yeah, yeah, right. There's so many reasons why people get married too young, and one of them happens to be this issue of the judgment saying you can't have sex outside of marriage, so people get married way too young just so they can have sex. I mean, right. Thank you for like making that clear, right? Yes, all these things are interrelated. Okay, it is time to wrap this up for today. Um, oh my gosh, that is so funny. I only married 5 times because that's the only respectable way to only in marriage can you have sex, so I must yeah, okay. Anyway, thank you. You all are making my point over and over again in the chat, so I appreciate that. Thank you for being here. Those of you who are here live, who were able to be here live, wanted to be here live. Thank you for those of you who are watching. If you've gotten this far, I will keep doing this Tuesday, Thursday. We're going to return to the Hebrew Bible next week. So going back to Exodus, and we'll just kind of move through from there. I might jump back into the Newer Testament every now and then. But yeah, there's so many stories. There's a lot to discuss, a lot to talk about and to air out, if you will. Right. So thanks for your time and your interest in this conversation. And I will see you all next week.